There we go. Let me go ahead and share. All right, here we are. So let's go ahead and if you want to, of course, as always, you can follow along. I'm not doing the actual like the perspective from chapter 5 or anything. I'm just kind of introducing some of the concepts. Some of them I'll use figures, like code examples from the chapter, and other ones I will use something else. But let me go ahead and create a new SQL tab here and empty out this guy. Oh, right. Shoot. Okay, let me go ahead and do a couple of things here. You guys, don't let me forget to talk about the correct way to submit these assignments. Okay, do not let me forget that. Hopefully we'll do that at the end of this demo here. Okay, so I'm going to be using AP and Fave Foods and maybe EX for some of these examples. I think I'm going to start, I'll start with AP. So I'm going to remember to do the whole use AP thing because I was just using musical instruments, and you can see because it's bolded over here. So if I do this, now it's got AP bolded, and I'm using that instead. So the first thing that the chapter goes into is how to create test tables. And basically what that is just a way of duplicating a table so that you can mess around with it without worrying about jacking all of your data or messing up the database or the table or whatever. The whole thing about creating tables and creating databases, that's really stuff for next semester and not this semester. But it is kind of useful to have that information in case you want to. So it's using the as keyword for something other than the column alias. You can create a table from another table using the as keyword. So let's say I want to, let's go ahead and first of all, I'm going to do a select all from invoices like this. I just want to see what's there, right? So we've got 114 rows. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 columns. I should know that by now. And 144 or 114 rows. So that's what we get from invoices. So let's say I really want to mess around with this table or with this data, but I don't want to risk this information. So we'll create a test table from it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a create table, and this is what we'll be doing next semester. We'll be creating tables from scratch. But in this case, we're creating it from another table. So the textbook talks about creating, let's start with invoices copy. I don't know how I wound up on that column line. Hang on a second. Okay, create a table, invoices copy. And then using the as keyword here when you're creating a table. So this is like a specific use case here. Create table invoice copy as, and then you can run a query here. And basically when you run a query, when I do select all from invoices up here, it winds up in the result grid here. And look, this looks an awful lot like a table, doesn't it? In fact, it is a table. And so what you can do is basically create a new table that is this stuff. Instead of sending this to the result grid, or in addition to sending it to the result grid, you're saving it as a new table. So I'll do create table invoice copy as, and then do the query that would result in the result grid down here from invoices. So this is what you do in order to take this guy and put it into a new table. So let's go ahead and do it. So create table invoice copy as, I guess I should do invoices copy as, select all from invoices, control enter. There we go. It worked. 114 rows. Notice that it did not give me a result grid down here. And let's go ahead and take over a look. So I've got the tables. There's invoices. Remember, this doesn't refresh very well, so I'm going to hit the refresh button. There's the invoices copy. Okay, so it's there. And if I now do select all from invoices copy like this, hit return or control enter, and yes, I've got 114 rows. I think, let me hide this thing. There we go. Yeah, 114 rows, just like the other one. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 columns. Everything looks the same, right? So you got to be aware that it's actually not quite all the same which I always have found rather irritating. But basically what it's doing is it's copying the results of the result grid into the new table, and really nothing else. Or if that's, even that's not consistent. That's not even a good way to put it, because it does contain some metadata about this data, but not all. Let's go ahead and do the table inspector, and we'll compare these next to each other. So I'm going to go to invoices, which is what we copied from, and hit the little I here, and we get the invoices table inspector. And let's do the same thing to invoices copy, which we just corrected, little I. So we've got a table inspector open on both of these, and they look fine to start with. If I go to columns, which is where you normally go to check out the structure of the table, and I'll do that with the invoices copy over here, and compare the two, and these are exactly the same, right? What do you guys think? Are these exactly the same? They look the same to me. What do you guys think?
Nope, not the same.
Not the same. What's different?
Invoice ID has a default of 0 and 1, but not the other.
Yeah, they're exactly.
On copy has a 0.
There are default values here in the invoices that get changed a little bit here. There is also, if I go to invoices, on the invoice ID, there's an auto increment here. So we haven't talked about that a whole lot, but you guys have experience with it already. If you do an auto increment on a column, that means that whenever you add another entry for that table, that column will automatically, if you don't put in a number there, it'll automatically generate an integer that's higher than the highest integer that's already in there. So basically, if you've got 23 rows and each of them are numbered 1 through 23, you create a new row, and the next one will go to 24, and the next one will go to 25, etc., etc. That information did not come over here to the AP invoices copy. So what it had to do is it had to put a different default value in there, because in the original column, you're not allowed to not have a value in the auto incrementer. If you don't put one in, it'll put one in for you. So it is an integer, and in the absence of auto increment, the default value for an integer is 0. So in this new table, if we fail to put in a value for invoice ID, instead of auto incrementing to the next integer, it'll just give us a 0. So there are some things about the metadata on these tables that's not quite the same thing, which, again, that could be irritating. Let's take a look at another difference between these. So AP invoices here, the next tab over is indexes. So we haven't talked about indexes much, or, well, okay, yeah, we've talked about them a little bit, but not a whole lot. But basically, indexes are a way to make things quicker to look up data in a table instead of having to read every single row in a 40,000 line, table or whatever. Then you just look things up by a single column instead. And the primary key is going to be the most obvious one of those. So in this one, in invoices, if you look down here, if this doesn't make any sense to you, just look down at this next table here. Let's see if I can make this a little bit taller. Yeah, here we go. So here's the columns, and column names, instead of running across the top, they now run down here. There's the primary key right here, the invoice ID, and then it's got some foreign keys here too. So vendor ID, there's something that connects it to invoices. There's something that connects it to another thing in invoices, and here's the terms. So yeah, 3 foreign keys and 1 primary key here in invoices. Let's go to invoices copy and take a look at indexes. No indexes, nothing. So primary keys, foreign keys, and some metadata like auto increment just doesn't copy over to the new table. So as long as you're aware of that, they can still be useful, but you just have to be aware they're not quite the same thing despite the promise. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and create a partial table here, or create a table from a partial copy. So we will do a create table, and the example that the textbook uses is, okay, let's say we want to create a table that's just for the invoices that are already paid in full, right? So we'll have one table that has paid in full invoices and outstanding balances, but then another one that just has the ones that are already paid, and we'll call that one old invoices. That's what old invoices. And so we use the as keyword. And this time, I mean, we're still going to do the select all from invoices. By the way, I think the example, just so no one gets confused, the example in the textbook actually has you do select like 2 or 3 columns instead of grabbing everything. But this is a simpler way to show the concept, I think. So instead of just select all from invoices, we'll just select all from invoices and include a where clause. And this is going to be our old friend, right? Where invoice total minus payment total. You guys are probably good and sick of this one by now. Minus credit total equals 0. Like this guy right here. So instead of returning 114 rows, I would expect this to return a smaller number of rows. Control Enter. 103 rows. Let's go ahead and do a select all from the new table and just check it out. Select all from old invoices. And there are the 103 rows instead of 114. Yeah. So if we did the math on this guy again, then we'd be able to see that these guys always zeroed out because all of these have been paid in full. So that's creating a table from an existing table that's, just collecting part of the data, partial data instead of the entire thing. Okay, so let's delete a table. Let's delete the last table that we just made. So the way you get rid of a table or a database is to use the drop clause. So I want you guys to check this out, okay? I want you guys to pay attention to this because this is what I was talking about at the beginning of class. This is super duper dangerous. Triple D dangerous. Let's go ahead and do a drop table. The one we just made is old invoices. Okay, simple enough, right? Very easy to do. Control Enter, and it does it. And that's it. It's gone. Let's go ahead and refresh over here. I want to see this. I'm going to look over here. Yep, old invoices is gone. I'm going to desperately try to do a select all from old invoices. Well, I've already got that clause up here. Let's go ahead and just use that one, right? I'll do a select all from old invoices, Control Enter. Error. Table old invoices doesn't exist. So if you guys want to really be
It's almost like it never existed.
It's like it was never there, right? All that data is just, now in this case, it's not that much data, right? You hire someone from a day, you get all those entered again. But if you guys want to really be chagrined, do like a Stack Overflow search for, how to retrieve lost database or how to get back dropped table or something like that. And there you'll find some people posting these desperate questions who have just lost like a table with 40,000 entries or something like that, and it isn't backed up anywhere. And all the answers, if you haven't done transactions and, controlled your commits and so on, sorry, it's gone. And that has never happened to me, thank goodness, and I really hope it never does because I can't even imagine how horrific would that be. So yeah, later on, I'm not sure if we would.
Sounds like a meeting nobody wants to be in.
Well, I'm not sure they'd even make it to the meeting. I think they'd just be fired at that point if it was something that big that got lost. I mean, can you imagine like all your client information or like or invoices or something like that? Or, accounts due. That's a lot of stuff. So just be aware. I like I said, next year or next semester, we may or may not get to transactions. I actually don't think we will. We will get to the point where I'll show you how to do MySQL dump to back up databases and then restore databases from the backed up version because that's a critical skill for database administration. But we don't know how to do that yet. So in the meantime, just don't ever use this, like seriously. Or at the very least, do this like before you start messing around with the hatchet on anything that has a lot of database on it. At least back up the data itself by creating another table using the as keyword here. But otherwise, if you can help it, just don't ever use this.
So drop table is essentially the nuclear option.
It pretty much is, except that there's a hydrogen bomb solution also, which is drop database, which is even bigger mess up than this, where you can lose multiple tables of thousands of entries if you're not careful.
An entire database just gone.
Gone. on, man.
You're
It
definitely
doesn't give you any warning or anything. There's no like, hey, are you sure you want to do this? No, nothing. It's just, oh, okay, gone. If you
not only will
insist.
you lose your job, you're going to get sued with that one.
Could be. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard of a case like that, but yeah, gosh, I don't know. Just, yeah, don't use the drop keyword until you're sure you know what you're doing. Before that, just pretend you never saw it.
Well,
Okay?
depending on how valuable that database was, I can't imagine that getting sued is out of the question.
I really don't know what the legal ramifications are of that. Like I said, fortunately, I've never been anywhere near a problem like that. I've screwed up graphic design jobs um, that probably were about $1,000 jobs. But that's about the worst I've ever done. And my first graphic design job I got because someone got fired right before me for messing up a multi-$1,000 job with a huge typo right there in the headline. So I know from experience to watch out for that sort of thing, but I've never been in a situation like that. I think I'm so careful. Like whenever I've worked with big databases, it's always been like someone handed me a spreadsheet and said, here, make a database out of this stuff. So I had to normalize the data and so on. But I always back things up like crazy all over the place. I back up the spreadsheets multiple times. I back up the databases multiple times. And I really just cover myself with that. And I suggest you guys do the same thing. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on. Enough scary stories for right now. So we did that. Let's go ahead and do, inserting data here. So inserting data means you need to like create one or more new entries on a table, right? So you've got so many vendors. You pick up a new vendor and you need to add a new entry for them. So this is what you do. You use insert into. So let's take a look at the syntax real quick here. So the syntax is this guy. So it's the insert keyword, as you might expect. The keyword into is actually optional. I always forget that because I've never done it without the into keyword. I've never seen it in a professional situation without people using the into keyword. I've never heard of it really. So even though the keyword into here is technically optional, I don't recommend leaving it out just because nobody leaves it out that I've ever seen. I don't know why, like keywords like inner and left and right, they get dropped if they're not required, but then the keyword into is something that like never gets dropped. I don't know why. So anyway, insert into, and then give us a table name. Oh, did I hit the insert keywords? No, there we go. So insert into table, and then you sometimes tell it what columns you want. I should put that in parentheses here because that's what the syntax is. So let me get that in there. So parentheses are actually part of the code. So if you're entering in column names, you got to use the parentheses. But the square brackets always mean like this is something that you do sometimes, but not all the time. So there are certain situations in which you don't have to tell it which columns you want it to insert into because, well, for instance, if you're inserting into all the columns, then all you have to do is give it the values. That sort of thing. So insert into table, and then if you're specifying a column list, you go ahead and do that. And then you use the values clause, and then tell it what values you want to put in there. I'll put values or expressions, because sometimes it's expressions. And that's it. It's really quite simple. In some ways, select is more complicated than insert into, in some ways. So let me go ahead and I'm going to switch over to Fave Foods here for a second because these are the simplest tables that I could think of. So let me go ahead and use Fave Foods, like so. And let's do a select all. This is to remind you guys what's in there from, what is it, My Faves. Like so, and these were my favorite foods. And then let's go ahead and do SO faves as well. So select all from SO faves. Oops, there we go. You get the same thing. Remember, there were a couple things in common. So we were just talking the other day, and we decided that sushi is also one of our favorite foods. So I may need to put another entry into each of these tables here. So I'll show you the verbose syntax and then the implicit syntax. So I'll insert sushi into my faves first. So let me go ahead and bring that up here. There's my faves, enchiladas, pizza, french fries, and ice cream. And I will do insert into, and then the table name, my faves, and then values. Now, what I can do here is I can put in, I think that I forgot to do that too. No, I put these in parentheses. Good. So this guy goes into parentheses. Now, in this table, like I said, it's the simplest one I could imagine. It's only got one column. It doesn't even have an ID column or an auto increment, primary key, none of that stuff. It's just got a single column with foods in it, and that's it. So really, all I need to do is put in the value here. I don't have to tell it what column I want to insert this into. I don't have to worry about other columns being left with default values or anything like that. Now, if I wanted to, I said I was going to do the verbose one here, so let's go ahead and do this. Remember, the full syntax is inserting to table name and then column list here. So the column is called food. So in parentheses, I would put insert into my faves food. That's the column. And then values, sushi. So put sushi into the food column. Let's go ahead and try it here. So I'll run that one row affected, and then select all from my faves again, and there it is. It's been added to the end of this. So let's go ahead and also put it into SO faves, but this time we'll do it without even specifying the column name here. So I'm going to do insert into SO faves this time, and this time I'm just going to leave it out. It's only one column, and there's one value down here. So, okay, so the basic rule about that, if you're inserting something into all the columns, and you make sure to put a value for all the columns, like if you've got 10 columns, like what was it, invoices or whatever, if you put in 10 values here, then it'll know, yeah, okay, I need to fill in these 10 columns with these 10 values. If the number of values that you put in doesn't match the number of columns in the table, then it'll complain at you. It'll throw an error message. Or like if I specified a certain number of columns here that doesn't match the number of values down here, then it'll complain at me. Again, same thing. So this one down here, there's only one column, one value, so I will do values. And then you still need to put it in parentheses because it's like it's a one item list. Like so. And run that guy. Looks like it worked. And let's go ahead and take a look at so faves. And there it is. It's been added in there, even though we didn't even include the column names in here. Okay, so I kind of like using that as an initial example, the my faves thing, just because it's so stupid simple. So let's do something a little bit more complex here. And this is kind of like an example from the textbook, which I found a little bit confusing, but I'm going to simplify it a bit. It is from, let's see, what page is it from here? Page 155, we're using the color sample table from the EX database and inserting some values in. The thing I found confusing about that example is that they entered code examples, and I thought, well, okay, I need to run through these code examples, and then the table will look like it looks like down underneath there. But it actually already looks like that. Let me show you what I mean here. Let's go ahead and do use EX, like so. I'll run that guy. Now let's take a look at the tables here. And it is the color sample that we're going to be doing with color ID, color number, and color name. Let's do a table inspector and color example so that we can know what we're doing here. I think this is a good idea. As soon as you start trying to insert values into a table or update values in a table or something like that, unless you're like super familiar with the table, as in you created it yourself and you know the ins and outs of all of it, the data types and everything, then it's not a bad idea. Just go ahead and take a look at the table inspector here. The very first question in chapter 5 and in the perspective tells you to do this. And I know it would be tempting to just say, no, I think I understand what it means. I'm just going to go ahead and start coding this SQL. Do what it tells you, do what it suggests, and go ahead and open up the table inspector so you can see what's going on here. So let's take a look at the columns. We've got those three columns, color ID, color number, and color name. We've got different data types here. So the ID column, especially if it's auto-incrementing, it's pretty much always going to be int, right? Color number is another int. it has a different default value here. So the auto-incrementing one, the default value is simply the next integer. But in the absence of that, if it's an integer and it's allowed to have a default value, then the default value is 0, right? These are both not nullable. You cannot have no entry for those guys. But again, like if we just, well, we'll go through the examples. The last one is varchar 50. So varchar just means variable character, and 50 means it's a max number of 50 characters. That's it. And it can be any number of digits in between 0 and 50, or 1 and 50. This one is nullable, and so I would expect the default value, like if we don't enter anything for that column for a particular entry, I would expect that to be null, the default value there. And then I think that's what we need to see here. So let's go ahead and leave this open because we might make reference to it again. Okay, so we're using EX and we're going to use color sample here. So let's try some different examples here. Well, first of all, let's go ahead and select all from color sample, like so. So here's what it looks like, and this is what I was talking about on page, what was it, 150? Yeah, 155, where it shows you a series of queries, and I would expect, looking through those, that, oh yeah, I need to run these queries, and then once I do, this will be the resulting table. But as you can see, I haven't done anything to color sample yet. And actually, I reinstalled these tables not too long ago, so nothing has been done to this stuff yet. So just be aware of that when you look at this table, which otherwise I think is a very useful table. I think it can be confusing that way. So instead of using these, we'll go ahead and add some more entries to these and try to duplicate some of these so that we can see what they look like here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to try inserting a row here, but I'm only going to insert the color number, which is the second row here, and see what happens with these, like default and the nullable and so on in here that we saw in the table inspector here. So let's go ahead and insert into this table just a color number, and that's it. So I'm going to do an insert into color sample, and I'm going to give it a column name this time. I'm going to insert color number like this, and then values. So when we've only specified one column, that means we need to have just one value down here, and that's it. So we'll go ahead and put it in. Now the color number is an integer type, so we just put in an integer. I settled on 707 as being one of the numbers that was not used yet in this example. They have 606 and 808, so I just, 707. Next thing we'll do 909. So we'll try that. So again, there's 3 fields here, right? But we're only entering something for the color number. So let's see what happens with the other 2 when we do this. So there is that one, just inserting it. Oh, it did it. It didn't complain, even though we only specified one column. Let's do our select all again. There's our new entry, where it gives us 707. Take a look at color ID. It gave us a new auto-incremented value. Before it had 1 through 5, and then it just added 6. We definitely did not hard code that in, right? It put it in for us. The other one is nullable, and it's varchar 50, I think it was, but because we didn't put in a value, then it gave us null. And that's the default, so nothing gets entered there, and that's what we get. So let's try something else now. So I will do another insert into color sample, and this time let's insert something just into the color name. So before we do the second column, we'll do the third column here, which is color name. Specify that column, values, and then we need to give it one value here, and any color name you want to. I'm going to pick magenta, like this. So this will be 7, I'm expecting. It'll auto-increment. It should give me a null value here, because this number is, oh no, I'm sorry, it won't give me a null value. Give me a 0 value. We already looked over here, right? And on color number, the default value is 0. So that means if I don't enter anything there, we'll get a 0 like these other ones do. And then we'll get magenta over here in the third column. So let's try that out, and then select all again. And there we go. So there's the auto-incremented one, there's the 0, and then there's the magenta that we just entered in as the one value out of those 3. So let's do some more of these. Let's go ahead and do all three values. So into color sample. And because we're doing all three column names, that means we don't need to bother with the column names here. Or we're entering values for all three columns. And when you do that, you can skip that portion, just like we did for the food column in faves, right? So I just skip that part and do values. Now that I've done that, because we didn't specify a column name or names, we need to put in all three of these values here. So in order to get all three, auto increment, I want the default value. So I will put in default here. And let's say I want a 0 for the default for color number, the second column. I'll put another default there. And then let's go ahead and put in a color name here. So like red, if I can spell. There we go. So auto increment 0 red. That's what I'm expecting here for the next one. Hit that, it liked it, select all, and 8, actually not 7 was the last one, so 8, 0, and red is the next one we got. So that's with these guys. So this is probably the safest way to do things. If you just want to make sure that you can just always enter all values for each column, then that's probably the simplest way to go about it. Let's try two more. I'm doing all of these that are on page 155 here, except with slightly different values. So insert into color sample. And for this one, we'll also do all three values. In fact, the next two will do all three values. So values, don't need to enter the column names. And let's go ahead and do default. $909. So this time we're doing the auto increment for the first one, default. We'll enter a specific color number here, which we didn't the last couple. And then we'll do a null value here for the last one. And this one is, I believe, varchar, and this is nullable unlike the other two. So I can have a null value in there if I want to. Try it. And then run the select. There's our last entry, 909, and null for the last one. So that works just fine. Okay, last one. Let's see what happens if we specify all of them as default. So you can see how that works. So insert into color sample. Once again, we're doing all three, so we don't need to specify the column names, values, and let's do default for all three of these. Like so, just to see what it does, right? And it liked it. Run select. And so here's what we gave all three null values here. So this is the auto increment, and then this is the 0, right? Well, we did all default, not all null values. We did all default. So yeah, this is the default for the auto increment. 0 is the default for this guy, and then null is the default. When it's nullable, if you don't put an entry, then that's what will wind up in there. Even if you don't specify explicitly null, if you put in default, it'll work. I actually think I want to try one more thing. I just want to show you guys that we can put in another value here, even though it's auto increment. Let's say I run this guy again, and I put in, I don't know, let's put in 20. Okay, we're on 10. Let's put in 20 here and run it. And it liked it, even though it's supposed to be an auto incrementer. I can hand code a value in. I can do control enter here, and let's take a look. And there it is. So it jumped from 10 to 20 here because I told it explicitly to do that. So you can override the auto increment. It'll work just fine. Now, if I delete, well, I guess we'll get to delete in a little bit, but I just want to say a little bit more about the auto increment thing. If you've got, let's say I hadn't put in the 20 in there, and I just had number 1 through 10 here. And let's say I wanted to delete the last entry. So I went ahead and deleted the entry that said 10. The next entry that I did would not auto increment to 10 from 9. It would auto increment to 11. It keeps track of whether or not that primary key number has ever been used. And it will not auto increment to that same number again. It will give you a fresh one each time. And I think that's important because, you know, when you're referencing things by an ID, even if that gets deleted from the database, you don't want then a different entry to have the same ID as some other entry that existed in the past. You want to keep them distinct from each other. So smartly, I think that's the way it works for these guys. Okay, let's see how we're doing. It's 7:23. Let's do updates real quick. And let's see, update existing rows and delete existing rows. So yeah, let's go ahead and do these. So next up is going to be updating rows. So what this means is you're taking an existing row in a table and you're changing something about it. You're changing the ID, you're changing the address, you're changing the vendor contact last name, whatever it is. You're not actually deleting any entry or adding an entry. You're just changing one. So that's what updating is, and it uses the update keyword, as you might expect. So the syntax here, blah syntax, and it's going to be update table. And this is the keyword that I always forgot in the beginning and sometimes still do. You have to use the set keyword and then specify which columns you want to change and what you want the new values to be. So in here, you might have like column 1 equals, and then, you know, either a straight value or an expression of some kind. And then same thing for however many other columns you're going to be doing, separated by commas. So value or expression, like so. And then, so here's the thing, with updating and deleting, this is where, oddly, it does give you, if you're in safe mode, it'll give you warnings when you're updating something. And not just warnings, but it'll give you actual error messages that say, hey, if you're not doing this right, then I'm not going to let you do it. And then it'll offer to show you a way to leave safe mode and go into the unsafe mode, which I heartily recommend against ever doing. So the condition here is the where clause, and the where condition, I mean, most abstractly, it's just going to be expressions here, right? Just like any where clause. But really what you're doing here almost all the time is saying where some key column, either a primary key column, a foreign key column, or one or more of a combination key column, which we haven't talked about yet. But anyway, some kind of key column equals, and then some kind of value or expression. So that's what it really is. I mean, technically, if you're not in safe mode, you could base this off of any column that you wanted to. You could say where address line 2 equals whatever. And in safe mode, it won't let you do that. You can do it in unsafe mode, but not in safe mode. So let's go ahead and try some of these out. And I'm going to try one that, let's see. Yeah, let's try one that's not going to work, just so you guys can see it right away. So I was just using, what produce? EX, I guess. Let's close that. Let's use AP again. Let's close that. Okay, so I think that's up at top too, but I'll go ahead and type it in again here. Okay, so we're using AP again. And let's do a select all from vendors, just so we can see what it looks like again. And there's the 122 rows that we get from this guy here. So let's say I want to update a particular vendor. And let's say I want all vendors that are in California to have a vendor state of San Francisco, because I don't know, I really like San Francisco, and so that's what that doesn't make much sense. But anyway, I'm just going to, that's my task. I'm going to try to take every vendor that has a vendor state of California and change their vendor city to San Francisco. All right, let's go for it. So I'm going to do an update vendors, that easily forgettable set keyword. And what I want to set is vendor city equals San Francisco. And then, as you know, we need a where clause, right? And I decided that I want this to be based on vendor state. I want it to, every vendor in California has a vendor city of San Francisco. So I will do where vendor state equals California. like so. The syntax is right. It looks right. The punctuation is right. Let's give it a try. So I'm just checking it a little more. Set vendor city equals San Francisco, where vendor state equals California. This is short enough that it really doesn't make sense to have it on other lines. So I'll just go ahead and do it like this to simplify it. Set vendor city equals San Francisco, where vendor state equals California. Control Enter, and I'm getting an error message. Let's check it out. I'm going to go down here, right click, and just like that, then right click and copy response so we can take a look at it up here. Error code 1175, you are using safe update mode and you tried to update a table without a where clause that uses a key column. To disable safe mode, toggle the option in Preferences, SQL Editor, and reconnect. Okay, so a couple things about this. By default, in MySQL Workbench, you're using safe mode that applies to update and delete. It says I tried to update a table without using a where clause, but yeah, I'm using a where clause, but this is not a key column. Let's do a quick table inspector here. This is what, vendors, right? So there we go, and we will take a look at indexes. And this guy has a primary key on vendor ID, secondary on vendor name, and a couple of foreigns on default terms ID and default account number, not vendor state. And so what it's doing in particular is it's refusing to do this if I don't base the where clause on a key column. It can't just be any column, else it won't work. To disable safe mode, toggle the option in Preferences SQL Editor. Don't do this. Just don't do that. I wish they didn't even put that in there, although I can see why they have to, because professionals might need to do that sometimes. But just don't mess around with those preferences. Just know that you have to reference a key column. Now, if I did this instead, if I said update vendors, set vendor city equals San Francisco. Sorry, let me go ahead and bring this up again so I can just see what the table looks like. Let's say I'm going to select all, or no, I'm sorry, I'm going to change the vendor city to San Francisco, where vendor name, which is a key column, let's say equals job track. Right now they're in they're in California, so they're in Los Angeles. We're going to change that to San Francisco. So let's change the where clause down here, where vendor name equals job track, no C, like this. Now, as I was saying over here, vendor name is a key. It's not the primary key, but it's a key. So update vendors, set vendor city equals San Francisco, where vendor name equals job track. Spell it correctly or it won't work. Control Enter. Now it worked, right? I didn't get an error message. Let's go ahead and select all. We should be able to see it. It's like entry 5 or something, 4. There it is, San Francisco, California. So it'll work, but you just have vendor name, the column name in the where clause has to be a key. That's all. So that's the way it works, and that's a good default. And you really want to keep it that way. Okay, let's see. I mean, the rest of it, the example from the textbook, it's really the same thing as what I just showed you. You're using the terms table, and you're selecting all from invoices, where vendor ID equals 95, and then setting terms ID to something different where vendor ID equals 95, and so on, and updating the invoices table. It's the same thing as what I just did here. So I won't go through that whole example there. Just watch the recording. Let's go ahead and wrap up with deleting columns. Deleting rows. So deleting a certain entry from a table, and this is going to have the same safe mode rules as update does. As we'll see. We'll go ahead and try that out at some point. Let's go ahead and use the color sample again. Outer X. Yeah, there's color sample. Okay. So I will use PX. Okay. And just so we can see it again, select all from color sample. Some days you just can't type, you just copy instead. There we go. Okay, yeah, so it's this guy that we were just using, right? So let's go ahead and delete some stuff from here, like we were talking about doing before. So let's see, color ID. Let's take another look at the table. Actually, we've already got it up here. So let's look at indexes. Do we have any indexes? Yes, we've got the primary key, of course, which is the auto-incrementing one. So that's color ID. So I should be able to delete stuff based on referencing in the where column the color ID. And it shouldn't work if I try one of the other columns. So let's go ahead and try both of those. We'll try one that works first. I want to get rid of this dumb 21 that I did here. So let's go ahead and do a delete from. I guess I forgot to put the syntax here, but it's delete from color sample. And this is one that I want to try, by the way. Just delete from color sample, just do the whole thing. But let's go ahead and do the where clause first. So where color ID equals 20. Okay, so I'll try that one. Looks like it worked. Let's do the select trick again so we can see, and the dumb 20 entry is gone. So you can do that for any of these. You can use other expressions too, right? You should be able to do like where color ID is between 7 and 10 to get rid of all 4 of these at the same time if you wanted to try other expressions in here. But usually you're deleting or updating a single call or a single entry at a time. So usually you just use the equals. So let's go ahead and try something else here. Let's see. Let's do a color number next time. I'm going to try to delete this one from 909 based on a where clause here, but it's the color number, which is not a key, so I don't expect this one to work. Let's try this one. So delete from color sample. And we will do where color number this time equals 909. And let's see if it works. I'm going to control enter. And nope, I'm getting the same error message. There's that 1175 safe update mode, and you'll be tied, blah, blah, blah. It won't work if I reference some column other than some key. And in this case, we've only got the one key. Let's see. So let's go ahead and try deleting everything here. We'll do this select here one more time. And we'll run down here, and let's just try doing delete from color sample, like so. And that also gives me the error 1175 about the safe mode thing. So keep the safe mode there. It's for your own safety. That's why they call it safe mode. So what happens if you did take this off? You can wind up updating and deleting significantly more than you intended to when you're not in safe mode. So for instance, let's say I'm not in safe mode and I was doing something like this, update vendors. And let's say I forgot to put in the where clause like this. And I just did update vendors, set vendor city equals San Francisco. Let me do quickly this and then that. I'm getting the same error message about safe mode. But if I were not in safe mode and I did update vendors, set vendor city equals San Francisco, you know what it would do? It would set every single vendor city for every single entry to San Francisco. It would go ahead and spit that same value down into every single row in that column. And so that is another way, including, alongside dropping a table or database, that you can lose an awful lot of data all at once. And if you're not in safe mode, just like dropping, it won't give you any warning. It won't give you any error, nothing like that. It'll just say, oh, okay, if you're sure, it'll go ahead and do it. So that's the benefit of using safe mode. Do not ever leave safe mode behind. It is your friend. Keep it close to you. Rely on it. And let's see. Okay, cool. I think that's it for this stuff. This is more or less the stuff that we're doing from Chapter 5. And again, the stuff in Chapter 5, the reading itself does not include this delete material that we're just doing down here. Again, it doesn't hurt to read through it. It's just a couple pages at the end of the chapter. It's got so much subquery stuff in it that I didn't want to throw it at you. But you got the recording here. So any questions about creating, updating, or deleting the Chapter 5 material? Okay, let me do one last thing before we go on a break, which is to talk about submitting files in the correct format for the chapter exercises. So I do understand the confusion because in chapter 2, which was the first thing that had deliverables this semester, what I did was I told you to go down here to the action output, click on this, do a control A to select it all, right click and copy row, and then paste it into a text editor, right? And save it as an CSV file. The only reason that we did that on chapter 2 is because you really don't do much of your own coding in chapter 2, and you certainly don't have to solve any problems. The only things you wind up with up here are things that it tells you exactly what to type in, and then you open up a few other SQ files and run them, and that's it. So you're really not solving any or doing any of your own code at all in that chapter. So what I had you do was just to make sure you'd run through it by having you do, export this down here. For the other chapters, though, for chapter 3 and 4 that we've done already, and then the remaining chapters 5 and 6, this is the stuff I want up here. I want your SQL commands. So let's say this was what I just run through for the perspective on chapter 5. It's not, but let's say it was. Then all you have to do is save it. Go up to this little guy right up here, save the script to a file, click it, and then I would always ask for your last name, dash chapter 5 or whatever, and .sql. Right? And then save it, and that's all you have to do. So this is what I would like to see for the remaining 2 chapters, please. Go ahead and just save the SQL file and then send it my way. You don't even have to mess around with this stuff down here at all for the remainder of the semester, except, of course, use it to check the results of your query. So that's it. Okay, cool. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.